Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of What's Happening. I'm George Binns, and guest this evening is Jim Modugno. And as you probably have noticed, there's been a lot of talk lately about converting everything to electricity to avoid carbon dioxide. And it sounds like a good idea until you look into it. And that's what Jim did. And as you can see on the side of the screen, there's a clue as to what we're going to be talking about. So, Jim, where do you want to start?
Well, thank you, George. I appreciate it. I will not confess to being a rules expert on electric energy or even electric cars, but I did, after reviewing the Resilient Together program that is being put together by the Beverly and Salem governments, I guess. There's a lot of good stuff you can see in there, but I also kind of focused in on the energy aspect of things. And as a result of that, I focused on clean energy for electric transportation, because that seems to be a really big push in this program, but also across the federal government, state government, and I guess even local now. So what I wanted to do is really understand and better understand the facts, the costs, the challenges, the risk factors, and what is the impact on society from the quest for all the electric vehicles and transportation system. It sounds good. Maybe it is, maybe it will be, but let's just go and see what we do. So I wanted to look at what are the goals. I talk about the total cost of ownership type of thing, current status of charging stations in the United States. A very interesting thing, and I'm going to get into that. What is considered clean energy sources, and what are the limits and challenges of these clean energy sources? And then this last section here will be, do we currently have enough capacity of clean energy to support all the new vehicles and future restrictions of fossil fuels in terms of, heating your homes and whatever? If not, what is required and how long to build out? So in the very first, let me take that down, George, or leave it up?
We can take it down, yeah.
Okay, let me take that down as we get, I'll stop sharing. So yeah, George, starting with that very first point, what I really want to understand is, what are the goals? And so the goals are kind of far-reaching. You can read anywhere from, they want 60% of all vehicles to be electric cars by the year 2050. Some people are saying, at least that amount by 2030. 2030 is only 9 years from now. We've seen some changes with General Motors and others saying we're not going to make any more electric cars going forward. You're seeing a little bit of that with Ford and a few other companies around. Everybody's got an electric vehicle. Last year, 2% of all car sales were electric vehicles. That's in 2020, 2%. And so I wanted to know, the very first question I want is going all green electric for vehicles really feasible? So the very first place I looked was, I wanted to look at and say, make a comparison between a gas-powered car, and one that is powered by electric battery energy. So I went to the Sierra Club, who is recognized as being one of the outstanding clubs that is associated with going green in the country. So when I checked with them, they indicated that electric car traveling 15,000 miles a year is really at a cost about 0.12 kilowatt hour, would cost the owner roughly $500 a year, right? And they would say it would be much better for the planet. So I said, okay, what is our electric cost here in Massachusetts? Because I'm only concentrating here in Massachusetts. So I took that same 15,000 miles and I used their numbers. So I didn't create my own for these activities. So I created my own using what our Massachusetts rates are per kilowatt hour, which is 0.23, and the long number after that, 767 per kilowatt hour. And so the cost of this would be $990, not so good for the owner, right? So obviously, basically, our electric costs in this area are much more than California, at least what it says. I find that hard to believe, but we'll move from there. So then I said, okay, what about a gas car, George, right? So we got gas cars right now. I don't own an electric car. I've kind of looked into it, but right now I think gas is good enough for me. So when I looked at it, 15,000 miles again, I used the Sierra Club's 28 miles per gallon comparison rates. And when I did that calculation, it really, at a cost of $2.80 a gallon, using their calculation, it came out to 536 gallons for the year. And again, the cost in a gas car is $1,500. So you can see that just those equations that they're using, that one would be led to believe that electric cars are less costly for you right off the chute in terms of that. So then I wanted to ask the question, really, why is the Massachusetts electric rate so much higher, George? And so when I looked at them, I think what happened is California only counted like one of the many different things. So when you look at your electric bill here, you got a customer charge right off the top. You got a distribution charge, transmission charge, transition charge, energy efficiency charge. I got some more, George. Renewable energy charge. There's an electric vehicle charge already in my electric bill for electric vehicles. I don't have one. And a solar distribution solar charge. I mean, really, George, who knew?
So, Jim, if I understand your numbers correctly, if you're driving a gasoline-powered car, it's about $1,500 a year to go 50,000 miles. And if
Yes.
you're driving a Sierra-powered electric car, it's $500 for the same 50,000 miles. But when you start to factor in what's it really costs us locally for electricity, you're now pushing the price up to, is it $900 or almost $1,000 a year?
Yes, when it goes up to $990. So
Now, the thing that bothers me about your list of all these little fees, it doesn't really show what the impact is if we get more and more clean energy, because there is no essentially clean energy massive source around, and the utilities have to buy electricity from anybody that's got a solar cell that's got a producing excess. And I think there's right now a 10% premium on that electricity. And if I look at some of the numbers from these offshore oil rigs, or I say oil rigs, offshore windmills, the premiums goes up and up and up. So the $900 apparent saving is going to quickly disappear from what I see.
yes, I think you captured my numbers correctly, George. And I think as I continue to go through the information here, I think you'll see that there's other factors that need to be considered when one goes to electric cars. And so let me bring up another point here. So when you think about the convenience of an electric car, right? You don't have to go to the gas station, or do you? Right? So most electric vehicles have a range of about 200 miles. And, everything I'm reading, George, looks like they're getting better at extending those ranges, but it's 200 miles. So where do I charge those? So there becomes choices about where do I go to charging stations and so forth. Well, today there's only three alternatives that you can have. The first one is an independent charge station, which there are not that many, and I'll talk about how many shortly. I'll also talk about your company that you work for might have EV stations plugged in. You go down to Cummings Center, you'll find, at least I can see when I walk through there, at least 20 charging stations. When I worked at Applied Materials, they had at least 20 charging stations as well that you could plug in, and they didn't charge you anything for. So you might see some of that. I think the new junior high has a couple of charging stations there for electric vehicles. The third one would be your home charger, right? So when I looked at that and said, okay, let's start with independent charge stations. How many are there today? So the numbers come out to be about 42,000 public charging stations, with only 4,000 being what they call fast charging. And I'll explain the difference between fast charging and slow charging stations. And so what they're doing, so overall, there are about probably 100,000 outlets in the country. You're talking about the whole United States, 100,000 outlets per se. That's not a whole lot. Right now, we have 1.2 million And that was a surprise number to me, electric cars on the road, right? And so that's with 1.2 million, 100 outlets. So then when I looked at it, so what is going forward on this? Well, the Biden administration has come out and said, we're going to actually cough up some $2 billion, and we want 5,000 more charging outlets by really the end of 2030. So that's, you look at that and you say, that's okay. You're starting to recognize that if you put more vehicles on there better be more places. Now, really, when you look at the two kinds of public charging stations, are the ones what they call a level one. And level one is a very slow charge. And with a slow charge such as that, you could depending on if you only need the top off, you may be there for an hour. That's a long time. And so if you had level two charges, they take about an hour to charge for 10 miles to be able to get you the number of kilowatt hours and everything you need. Fast charges will basically get you up around 80 miles instantaneously in about 20 minutes. So what is the level one? A level one is 110 volt. A level two charge is a 240 kilowatt volt, is a watt. Okay, so they're totally different. I got a quote here from Cox Automotive Studies that when they talked about it, it'll take a lot more charging stations to lure Americans to buy EVs. They have anxiety over the high price tags.
Jim, one of the issues you're bringing up is you go into a gas station, it takes you 5 minutes to fill up your tank, and you're good for a couple of 100 miles. You go into one of these charging stations and you get maybe 20 miles, maybe 80 miles worth of electricity in something like a half an hour or more. So the turnover at the gas pump or the turnover at the charging station is grossly different. It's like 5 minutes versus a half an hour. It's 6 to 1. So that automatically implies that even if you only count the number of gas stations we have and say, we'll have that many charging stations, you got to still multiply it by 6 because you can't turn it over that quick.
Right. You're absolutely correct. The turnover is just not there. And so this is why you see a lot of employers putting them into place. And ultimately, I think what you're going to find is that you would have to eventually, people who own those electric vehicles would probably have to put a charging platform in their own homes so they can charge overnight.
Yeah.
And the cost for those, George, range from $1,000 for the installation to as high as $3,000 for the installation.
Yeah, and one of the things that was very curious, watching an old TV show, they were talking about some electric cars they had back 20 years ago, and GM just trashed them when they were finished with the demonstration, and everybody got excited about it. But one of the little things they popped up with is, in 1937, General Electric came up with a patent for a parking meter that you could plug your car into.
Wow.
So, I mean, this has been languishing for years. But you think about, okay, now you're talking about a possible situation of every parking space is a charging station, which sounds good. And so somebody did a calculation of, okay, you got a parking lot full of cars that are on a slow charge. How many kilowatts are they sucking up? And where's that going to come from? This is getting to be an exercise in what are you smoking this week, man? Because it gives me some wild ideas.
Yeah, they do. And oftentimes, I think the idea sounds really good, except for the fact that as you look into the details and you look at all the obstacles potentially, and that's what we're trying to do here is be fair in terms of our assessment of everything. But, when you look at it, the infrastructure is not there at this moment in time, even in terms of charging station.
Yeah.
For the person who's just going around town and can charge it in their own home if they had a charging station, that's probably not a problem because they can charge it overnight.
Yeah.
But somebody who's going considerable amount of miles, say going 50, 60, 70 miles to work, or a salesperson on the road, Think about how convenient that would have to be. Think about going across country in an electric vehicle. One of your biggest chores isn't finding a hotel. Your biggest chore may be finding a charging station.
Yeah.
So you got to think about those type of things. And so, we see people, the analysts are looking at this and saying, there's a difference between big cities and there's a difference between people who live in the countryside.
Yeah.
And so that has to be taken into consideration. And so when you look at some of this stuff, George, in terms of the charging and how many miles you can get out of them and so forth, that is definitely a major consideration that I don't think they've worked it out yet. And I think they may be moving faster to have vehicles out there than they have the infrastructure to handle them in terms of charging. And then later on, George, we'll talk about where's all this clean energy going to come from, right? So let me talk just a little bit about, I said when I go to gas in my car, basically I can gas my car up and it's 5 minutes, like you said, George, right?
Yeah.
Charging it, I'm now going to have to think about it and plan it out. So that's a whole different way of looking at it. So what is clean energy, right? So I'm going to bring up the topic.
Before you get into that, Jim, just look at the situation here in Beverly. Used to be a Ford dealership on Rantoul Street, Thomas Street.
Correct.
They sold out, and they sold the building, and they put up some condos, apartments. And
Correct.
per the city regulation, every condo has to have a certain number of parking spaces. Well, the parking spaces are in the parking lot that used to be next to Thomas Ford. So there we are, a situation, and you're pointing out the difference between the cities and a private residential area like where you live and where I live. I got a garage on my property. I could reasonably convert that to 120. I already got lights in there, so that's an easy conversion. The next step, however, for somebody in a condo is you got a parking space. How are you going to get electricity to it? It's a hell of a long extension cord.
Well, yes, and that would take an enormous amount of investment by the owners of that property to provide those type of infrastructure services, right?
Exactly, and that's not part of the equation here.
No, and if you look at the cost of things too, if you want to charge up and get yourself 30 kilowatt hours you get 100 miles in that, that's going to cost you approximately $7.13. The math is in that area, right? A charge on your home charger, and you have about 130 minutes. But in essence, I could go to the gas station, pay my money, and I'd be gone.
Yeah.
I'm on my way. And so I think there's different ways of how to approach it. So one of the hottest things I found, George, is the interpretation of what is clean energy. And clean energy gets very diluted at times, depending on who you're reading and what site and what group. And so basically it kind of narrowed it down when I was looking at it, is that clean energy, green energy, where does it come from? Well, we know it's not going to come out of, clean energy is not going to be coming out of China, all right, because they're building 128 additional more coal burning plants over there. But one of the things that you look here in the United States is wind power and solar power are two of the biggies, along with hydropower, water power. So those are right up there. Unfortunately, gas powered electric plants don't cut it because they're considered to be dirty. They're very efficient, but they are told to be dirty because they actually are using fossils, right? So you got oil, coal, gas is not permittable. So that leaves you just with basically, you got hydropower, you got solar power, you got the wind farms. Now, one of the things we know about the wind farms is you got them all out in the ocean, or if you're in Texas, you have them way out in the plains where the wind is, right? However, the transmission lines that are required to bring them to the sources of who you're going to be using that energy is extremely expensive.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want to be out there in the winter trying to maintain a wind farm, right?
Well, the other part of the problem is we've got a wind farm on the East Coast, right off the coast of Block Island, about 9 miles out off of Block Island, which is uh, about 20 miles off the coast of Rhode Island. And they're running a cable from the wind farm all the way up into Quonset, up to Scarborough Beach, just north of Scarborough Beach. And that's nice,
Wow.
except they're out of commission right now because the cable got uncovered. So now they got to go bury the cable again. So I think what you're pointing out is that, yeah, there's maintenance that goes on with these things. And it's one thing to go down the street and repair a broken line from between telephone poles. It's another thing to go out to sea on the best of conditions and dive down some significant number of feet to work on a cable. So this is another one of these little factors that, oh yeah, we'll just take care of that somehow. And the magic is applied.
Yeah, it's a challenge, George. It is absolutely a challenge, and I'm not so sure that all the total cost or the total risk associated have always been captured here. So when I looked at this, one of the other clean energies, believe it or not, is nuclear power. So it's clean, but it just may not make it with the green machine. They don't like nuclear per se. But with more electricity being used and buildings being converted over, they don't want you to use oil to heat your home or gas to do it. Where's it all going to come from? And so that's where I'm going here. Think about the solar risk. The sun is nice for sure, right? But it's only out during the day. And then it may not always be out because you got cloud cover, you have storms, you have winter and so forth. So you only have a certain amount of time you can actually capture that energy. Obviously, you'd have to capture it and hold it in batteries or something. The other thing that you look at is how many sunny days a year in New England do we get in terms of sunshine? So I looked that up. The weather.com says it's 200 days a year are sunny or partly cloudy. Average annual sunlight hours is 2,600 hours, or in other words, 7.12 hours a day available, right? So you got to keep those things in mind. Now you got to talk about when you look at wind, when we talk about the wind farm, when the wind's generating, that's fine. If you have too much wind, when the wind's blowing more than 12 miles per hour, each wind turbine produces 1.0 megawatt, which is pretty darn good. At reduced speeds, electricity obviously is reduced. But one of the big risks is when the wind exceeds 45 miles an hour, they shut down the blades. They lock them down because they can't afford to damage the blades as well as the gearbox. And so, when I worked up at a place down in Gloucester, we got the big turbine on, windmill on top right outside my office. The bottom line is that thing was down a lot. One of the problems we had was that parking lot right below it. During the winter months, you couldn't park out there because sometimes the blades would pick up ice, and they'd throw the ice down. And on 3 occasions, icicles went right through the roofs of cars. Right. So again, you have to look at all the risk factors. So no wind, too much wind. Also in the northern regions like New England, the turbines are locked down more times than not during the winter because of all kind of factors. You could have ice on them as well. So with a target of 60% electric vehicles, George, in the near future, somewhere between 2030 and 2050, what has to happen? Well, how about we're going to have more charging stations? Definitely, we talked about that. Relying on solar power and wind power is a risky proposition.
Yeah.
I think it's part of the solution, but it's also expensive. You can tell, I gave you that earlier. In our electric bills today, we're being charged for electric vehicles. We're being charged for solar because we're subsidizing them.
Yeah.
Already.
Well, it doesn't pay for itself.
Exactly.
There's a simple thought I've got in my mind. Technology advances as it's capable of advancing. Windmills were invented long before Christ, back in the time frame. And they keep coming up every so often. But they keep getting shut down because there's a better thing. And the better thing was a steam engine and a few other things along the way. And gasoline engines do a marvelous job because gasoline is a very high energy source that is very dense.
Correct.
And there's a whole bunch of technical issues involved. And I think the one that surprised me is Brian T. Watson wrote a editorial that showed up in the Salem News, where he was criticizing the fallacy of electric cars, the same points that you're making. But unfortunately, he ended his article with, well, we just have to give up cars. Wait a minute. The reason we've got cars is because there's a better way of life if you have more flexibility. And the example I like to use, his solution is we all go back to the philosophy of living in a mill village and working in the mill village, and you owe your soul to the company store. And I think this is what's really bothered me about all of this stuff is that everybody's got a really great idea until you try to implement it. And when you start to dig in, as you've been doing, to what's the details involved, how do we make this happen? Oh, I didn't think of that. Or I think we'll have to do this a little later. Reality sets in. And I'm a firm believer in electric cars, but it means a change of lifestyle because you don't have an electric car that you can take on the family trip casually, well, like you point out, without having to plan it 2 weeks in advance and get not only a reservation for the hotel motel, you probably have to get a reservation for the charging station. It's
Absolutely.
more comfortable. But when I was working at GE, 10 miles away, with a charger in my garage, a small 2-passenger vehicle, that would have been great. Charge it up overnight, drive it to work, drive it home again, charge it up again. So it means a different concept of having cars that are more flexible as opposed to having one car that does everything. That's total lifestyle change. But anyway,
It is. And
we've come to our happy half-hour limit. So,
all righty.
so as we discussed when we were thinking about this conversation, there's going to have to be another show. And so, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for staying with us this evening. As I point out a lot of times at the credits at the end of the show is my email address. You got a different comment, would like to express your views, send me an email and we'll make room for you. And thanks again for watching. Jim, thank you very much, and we'll do this again.
Thank you, George.